We did not get this web address in your handouts, but we wanted to be sure that we showed you all where this information is. The new EBPs that just came out in January all have fact sheets and data collection sheets to go with them online.
And more than just that, the fact sheets, if you go to this website, for each evidence-based practice, there are checklists and information, little briefs on how you can implement the strategy. So it's really, really, really easy to get the information. So what you do is it's autismpdc.unc.edu, and we will keep this pulled up when we finish presenting. In case you guys are still busy eating right now, you can get this information afterwards. Autism PDC
For Professional Development Center.
FPG
G.
.unc.edu.
Org. Edu, sorry.
If you Google NPDC, National Professional Development Center, and ASD, it'll come up. It's the first thing that comes up. So we'll leave this website, we'll pull it back up when we finish so that you have access to it again if you weren't able to grab it.
Can you show
Yes.
them?
So right on the left-hand column there, you will see evidence-based practices. And if you click on that, you can go into the EBP briefs down at the bottom. And what you can do then is you can click on any evidence-based practice. Let's go into functional communication training since it's one that we've talked about. And so it tells why it is, what skills or interventions can be addressed by using the intervention or that strategy. But then you can go into these little components down here, and it will give you the steps of how you can implement that strategy. And this one's 13 pages long. So it starts from how do you begin implementing and each of the steps that are involved in that evidence-based practice. So it's very detailed and it's very teacher-friendly. And then there's even data sheets. I don't know if this one does. But usually at the end, there might be data sheets or examples of how you can collect your data. So it's, data. It's very thorough and it's great because it truly is a checklist, so there aren't any questions of how you would implement it. You can also go to the checklist. Oh, data sheets and checklists are separate now. So it's broken down for you very specifically. And then the data sheets.
So rather than print all those out for you today, we decided we'd just show you the website, know that it's there. The new ones are there as well as the ones that were established 2 years ago. The new 14 report is up and all of the briefs, data collection sheets, all of that is available. And so if you're wanting to talk with a teacher or work as a team in terms of starting to implement some of these strategies, don't feel like you've got to come back to your notes from this presentation. Go back to this website and it's going to spell it out for you step by step. Okay? It's a great resource. It's probably the most comprehensive resource available right now in terms of step-by-step implementation guides. So, okay. Wonderful. We will try and make this work again. Who knows, right? So our next evidence-based practice is exercise. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that because everybody knows what exercise is. What I want to know is how many of you have students that use exercise as an intervention in your classroom? Okay, tell me, what does that look like for your student?
It's a student I had in the past, and
okay.
So we had scheduled times. I called it the run the fence. We had this fenced-in area, and before certain classes, I had a door that actually led out right next to this area, so we would go out. He had a staff member that would go, and he would run the fence 5 times, come back in, sit down. Didn't work.
Okay.
So we did that. I can't remember because it's been several years, but there were times throughout the day we scheduled certain times where he would
Okay, so scheduled times for running or exercise, and did that help him calm his motor or bring his motor up? I'm not sure.
It helped him to get rid of some of
That extra energy. I just had the same conversation with my son over dinner last night. I said, what was your high for today? We do highs, lows, mediums. And he says, oh, it was great. I got to roll up the rug in music class, and I got to carry it all the way down to Mr. So-and-so's room. And I said, oh, yeah, you were that kid today, huh? Not tricking mama. I know. And he goes, yeah, and then I got to carry a box from there all the way to the gym and back.
Getting his proprioceptive input.
He needed some contingent exercise yesterday to work out those wiggles, I suppose. Who else is using it? Leah.
Well, I do a little bit opposite. I get into bed and I think up and moving a little bit going because it will just crash right after lunch.
Okay.
Not that anybody's going to do that today.
Nobody's going to crash after the carb fill that we got.
So with him, I make this like brain break thing where it's all colored, so they get the color organized and then exercise.
Okay.
In each box. So like it'll be 10 toe touches or arm circles or just, one inch run in place for 30 seconds.
Wonderful. Yes, ma'am. You did yoga? Okay. So I love the fact that already this has come up, that you can use exercise for two different purposes. You can either bring them up because they just carved out and they're so tired and they want to take a nap, or you can bring them down. And endorphin release happens with exercise, right? If you get to a certain point of exercise, endorphin happens, but you have to get to a certain point within exercise for endorphin release to happen in your brain. I think sometimes teachers fall into the thinking where if I just have him do this one thing, then he'll be just fine. Well, maybe that wasn't enough exercise to result in endorphin release. So.
What we're going to also quickly touch about with exercise is how many of you guys work closely with an occupational therapist on your teams, your students' teams? Because it's really important to have that OT to a sensory profile or some type of sensory assessment, because you can build your sensory breaks in through exercise. So you can have your scheduled times throughout the day, and I've seen students who have a sensory schedule every 30 minutes because they need that much input to be able to be at that level where they can take in information. So it's really important to work with your occupational therapist so that you can identify what ways and what modalities your students are going to need to be regulated. And they can help come up with what some of those ideas are to help come up with some of those exercises so that it meets their sensory needs.
Tied to that, on our drive up here this morning, it's always when you do your best thinking, you have like your shower thoughts and then you have like your 2-hour commute thoughts. And that's generally when we get a lot of thinking and kind of change our thoughts about things. One of our talks this morning, and it has to do with exercise and working with your OT as well, is that we have to understand what our specialty is. And we are not occupational therapists, or maybe there's one in here, I'm not sure. Nikki and I know a whole lot about sensory. We've worked with kids with autism, we've done sensory interventions for years, but that doesn't mean that we can design a sensory diet for a kid. That is an occupational therapist's job. And part of that, this is the reason Christi Borders won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Have you guys had this kid who comes in the morning and he's wearing skinny jeans, like because he needs the compression. So he wears like this kind of jean, because he needs that tight compression.
Under Armour would be
Under
better.
Armour, underneath because I love that compression. And you're like, oh, great, so I'm going to do deep muscle compression. We're going to put on that weighted vest. We're going to give him all this. And then 3 hours later, he strips. Right? Well, why does that happen? It's too much. Or it was just the right amount.
For the 20 minutes that he needed it.
For the 20 minutes that he needed it. Exactly. And then his body needs to regulate in a different way. It's not our job to understand that regulation for that system, but it is our job to work with the occupational therapist, because that's about how long certain systems can regulate you. Motor can regulate you for a lot longer period, but that's part of why don't make your best guess on designing a sensory diet. It's really not our job, and we could actually make things worse if we assume that, oh, but that's our Under Armour kid. We're going to heavy weight him all day long. We could really be doing more damage than good by making that assumption, and with this much knowledge, giving the wrong recommendations. So that was just one of the things we talked about this morning, and I always like to throw that out there as a caution.
What I like about this, though, is because I think we do a really good job regulating sensory systems, or we put supports in place to regulate that sensory system in elementary schools. Well, a lot of the middle school, junior highs, and high schools that I've been in lately, they have really been taking advantage of the weight room and also the exercise equipment and helping to regulate those sensory needs. And which is even more awesome now, because exercise, we know, has always been great and beneficial, but we even have the research supporting it for use for our kiddos in the school system. So just another reason we don't want to get rid of PE.
And another reason that we're glad to live in Illinois.
Exactly.
Where they can't take away PE, and then we're one of the few states that has that.
Aaron.
When I was in Ohio, it was the first thing they cut. And so then you have kids that don't get PE at all during their week, and they don't have a way to regulate, and they don't have a way to work it out. So right now, for now, because we do live in Illinois.
And I want to tag on to one thing about that.
Very thankful.
Because we do still have PE. However, one of the things that we do when we have kiddos who engage in some pretty significant behaviors, what's the first thing that we take away from them? Recess.
Recess.
I highly, highly recommend never, ever taking away recess. Why would we not want to take away recess from a kiddo? Why would we not want to remove that from their day? Because they need it. That's one of the only times that they get to go outside. Sometimes that can be a difficult time for them, but that is a release. That is a time where they get to wander, where they get to engage in that whatever activity they want to get their wiggles and jiggles out and to rev their systems up. So it's really important that we don't ever take away that from their day, but we could provide some different consequences or supports to support their behavior.
Sherry, did you have a?
Something non-sensory, but it's an opportunity for them to practice their social skills in unstructured settings.
Absolutely.
Right. Who cares if we teach social skills training with us, one-on-one? I always think, great, he can communicate with the teacher. That's going to get him through the school day, but no other part of his day. That's not where we want to work on things like that. So that you can use contingent exercise.
Okay, go ahead and you can look up the alert. What you are transition, you're older, right? For those that are supporting youngers, Shelley Somethingberg, how does your engine run?
Oh, I'm like.
Which is the alert system. That's a really good program for itty bitties. Give me a second. There's another one that is zones of regulation. It's very similar to the strategy that we showed you, the 5-point scale, but zones of regulation takes it to that next step of what you should do when your body is in a yellow zone. What can you do to bring it up to a green, or how can you regulate it? And it's very individualized, but it's a great strategy. So zones of regulation is a good one.
So anybody with a preschooler, just think of the bow zone. If you all have that, you don't have that. Okay, never mind. It's a show that actually uses zones of regulation. She talks about my energy band is getting low, and it sinks into the green, and what she has to do to get back up to the yellow and then eventually to the red.
But also, we brought a lot of visuals that we haven't touched yet, but there are some good self-regulation ones that I brought. And this is hands and arms. So this is a way that a student could get some of that extra sensory input by pretend that you have a lemon, squeeze that lemon, drop the lemon, and repeat it 2 times. So these are different ways that you can teach some of those self-regulation and sensory-related behaviors. So these are good ones where you're welcome to come up and take a look at them. There's lots of them.
Yes, ma'am.
all geared for neurology, and it talked about how our brains, when we're sitting like in the classroom, and we're talking about the ADHD, the autism, whatever, when you're in a classroom, it's completely different from when you go to play, where you actually have to shut down. That's what play does. It shuts down that part of the learning part of your brain and lets that other part go wild. And that's what your brain needs. So when you take that away, that need isn't met in that part of the brain. So when they're in the classroom, then it becomes that behavior because literally their brain needs that brain too.
So I'm going to take another bunny trail off of that. And how, remember at the beginning, we were talking about the antecedent interventions that we do and setting up your classroom environment. Another thing related to the sensory area for our students on the spectrum that is very distracting is when we go into classrooms and there is what we call visual clutter hanging from the ceilings, hanging from the walls. So you really have to find what that balance is based on your students' needs as to what is going to be distracting from them and pulling them away from that instruction. So yeah, there's lots of things that you have to take into consideration about what's going on in the environment at any given moment. Moving on.
Moving on. The next one is what we've promised from this morning. We're going to do some very initial, very introductory training on PECS. Again, we're very excited that PECS has been recognized as an evidence-based practice now. We understand the reason why a visual signal that stays there is important because it doesn't disappear, right? It stays there. Picture exchange communication system is just one system that can be put in place for functional communication training. And we're going to do this. We're going to hand out some PECS books. We're going to practice a little bit at your tables or in small groups. But one of the things that I say it and I say it and I say it, and maybe someday my record will skip off this track. I'm not exactly sure. But the first place we go for communication training for our kids is what? If they're not hearing and they're not using spoken, so we go to sign, and that's not as salient as this visual system. This has to be taught in the same way that we teach signs to kids who are successful signers, right? I'm not saying don't sign with your kids at all. Sign is very effective for many, many, many students to learn concepts. But do you ever plan your sign instruction? Of course you do. So you have to do the same thing with this system. It is truly a system of instruction, and it's going to follow the same progression every time. One of the things Nikki and I talk about is a lot of times PECS has been put in place and it's not PECS. It's just use of pictures that we're going to pass back and forth. And
or if a student has a visual schedule in their environment.
Or there's a visual schedule and not actually an exchange system with the intent of communication. And the hard thing is for a teacher to say, you know what, this isn't actually PECS. We're not doing this the way that it's designed. Christi and Nikki said this. I don't think we're doing it right. But now what do I do? Well,
that's fine.
That's fine. That's the question you should ask. The answer is always go back to the first phase. And that's going to seem like a step backward, but here's the thing. Nikki and I have both seen kids go from phase 1 to phase 3 in a day. Because they already know something about communicative intent if you're taking that step backward. Because it's not really a step backward. Never tell yourselves it's a step backward. But they're going to move quick if they already have intentionality. You're just teaching them the means with which to do it. We've also had kids that take months to move to step 3.
One of my kiddos that I've worked with for a very long time, we started off on phase 1 and it took 3 years. 3 years. So his learning curve was really, really slow, but the whole cool thing is it may have been slow, but he continually progressed through the phases. And what was really awesome is once he got to discrimination, which is phase 3, watching him walk to his communication book, open it up, flip the pages, pull out that icon, put it on his sentence strip, seek out his communication partner, and initiate, request, which was something he hadn't done 2 years ago. So it might take you a long time to get there, But once you're there, it's awesome. They have a system in place. He's not using his behavior to communicate. He's using his words.
One more thing, and we said we would talk about it, is signing with kids with complex learning needs. And not the cognitive part right now, but the fine motor part. How many of you have students that you would consider complex learners who also have fine motor delays? It is like hand in glove for most kids with autism, but lots of kids with other disorders. And I know that there are so many disorders that we could talk about in this room that we can't even count the number of them at this point. But fine motor and deafness, fine motor and ASD really are commonly comorbid. So we really have to ask ourselves this question. If you have a child with fine motor delays and you've kind of figured out the home sign, right? Because they're modified signs, aren't they?
They're all approximations.
And you all know that because you've worked with your student. Mom knows them, you know them. Does the school secretary know them?
What about the person at McDonald's when they go to order a pop?
Even if they know sign and they're doing this for pop, is that going to work? No. So you really have to ask yourself kind of a long-term communication question here. What is going to be more efficient and more generalizable to more people in their environment? Handing them a picture of a soda can or going like this? Because sometimes I think we're just going down a road that is only going to set them up for being misunderstood and miscommunicating.
Does that mean that we don't use any sign? Absolutely not. But for that formal communication system, wearing my ASD hat only right now, I never recommend full sign because they're never going to be a part of the deaf community. And 99% of the time, those signs that they make are approximations. And so they may have 100 signs, but they only have 100 signs with the 4 people that they're with on a daily basis. It's not going to be generalizable outside of that environment in which they're used.
Make sense? That's kind of where we stand on that. It's kind of a hard question, and it's not often a question people want to address, but I again would urge you to think outside of those classroom doors and outside of that family unit, where our goal is to make even our itty-bitties, we don't think of them as itty-bitties. Think of them as 20-year-olds. So what can we teach now that they can use when they're 20 at Burger King? Because when you're choosing formal communication systems, this needs to be something that you commit to. Make sense? All right, let's do phase 1.
All right, so we talked about PECS being a formal communication system. There are 6 phases to PECS. So did you go over this while I was?
I didn't. Did I? No, I didn't.
So there's 6 phases to the Frost and Bondi actual PECS.
Sorry, I've lost my fidget toy.
Put that back.
I'm self-regulating.
We're going to just go over phases 1 through 3, which are primarily the phases in which you will begin with. And what PECS does, PECS teaches initiation. Our kiddos on the spectrum, oftentimes that is what they are missing. They are missing seeking out a communication partner and initiating a conversation or to get their basic needs and wants met. And so that is the purpose of PECS. It teaches initiation. It teaches a student to seek out a communication partner in the environment to do that exchange with. It teaches that exchange. So children are taught to initiate communication by exchanging a picture and icon with a partner in exchange for a certain item. And so it's based on all the principles of ABA. We've talked about those all morning, all of those evidence-based practices, shaping, reinforcement, discrete trial. All of those are principles of ABA, and they are also included in PECS. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go back to that reinforcer preference assessment. And this is where you're going to choose one of those items that is at the top of their list. You're going to identify what it is they're going to do or what it is they're going to get by using that card. Because what is the student probably going to do? Instead of using an icon, what do you think they're going to do when you're sitting at a table and you have an item out in front? They're going to grab it. But we want that item that they're going to be grabbing for to be really reinforcing, really motivating. And so you're going to start with your preference assessment, and typically you're going to start with an edible, because that's usually what little kiddos like. An M&M, a piece of candy, a Cheeto that they can suck the cheese off of. So that's where you're going to begin. And then these are the different phases, and we're just going to touch on the first 3. Talked about that. So phase 1 is the physical exchange. And phase 1, you don't even have the book. The book isn't even introduced yet. We'll get to the book in a minute. So what you can do for phase 1 is get an item out, and I passed out a couple of items. But what happens here is upon seeing that highly motivating, highly reinforcing item, the student will pick up a picture and exchange it with the communication partner. And so, do you want to do an example of it so we can show? Does somebody want to come be a student? We need 3 people. So that's another thing to consider, is when you're starting your first phases of PECs, you always want to make sure that you have, 2 people. The communication partner, who the student's going to be engaging with. Are you going to be the student?
I don't know.
Have you done PECs before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, do you want to be the prompter?
Okay.
So you're going to have one person be the prompter, and the prompter never says a word. The prompter is only there to prompt, typically a full physical response. And so I'm going to have an item. Usually you're doing this
And
at a
all
table.
of my students always sit so nice and compliant in their chairs. I would prefer to work for the Icon wine. Okay, that'll work.
Is this your cup?
Yes, it is. We can pretend.
And when you're first starting off, the icon on your icon, the picture on your icon, doesn't necessarily have to be the item that you have, because we're not teaching them to look at the picture. We're teaching them literally the physical exchange, that they pick something up and in exchange they get the item. So we're going to have the card out in front of them. I'm going to be, if it's M&Ms, I'm going to be eating M&Ms. I'm going to be drinking her pop. And she's a very good student, because how many kiddos do you really think are going to be sitting in their seat? They're going to be up, grabbing. So the second that she goes to grab for her pop, the prompter redirects her hand to the communication partner, who is me, and I have my hand open, and I say, wine or pop. I want pop. And then I give her her reinforcer, and she gets to have a sip of it. And if it is a drink that you're using, I would put less than this in it, because it's either going to get tossed if they really don't want it, or they're going to drink it, and you want there to be lots of opportunities. Yes?
If you're holding the picture in one hand and the item in the other, how do you
The
sign?
picture, we're not signing. It's the communication is purely in the picture.
Okay, because it sounded like you were carrying the sentence.
So what you do is you have the icon on a table right in front of her. And so she's going to go, I will either have this out in front of her, the actual item that she wants. So the pop, it will be in front of her. I might have my own, or I might pretend that I'm going to drink it and put it back down. So then she's going to reach for that item. The prompter redirects her to the icon, and then I have the icon, and I pick up the item, and I pair them in front of her. Pop. I want pop. So it's the actual item.
She's saying,
Oh,
Right.
but it's the pic. Oh,
so we're going to switch.
I guess you don't have
Sit.
to. See, I'm doing it with
It's all right, this is the
autism.
deaf ed thing. Okay, if you have a signing kid and this happens, this is going to, I'm drinking, you want my drink, and then you're going to...
But they're not signing, because you wouldn't be doing this if they're signing.
Right, but I'll show you
Okay.
how to do it. It's okay.
Right.
This is part of what you want to do is a visual pair.
Your icon is your word right now. Your icon is your communication.
But you can also do this if you're so wanting to also just model and let them see the sign. I get it. This is actual cognitively all they need. They don't need any verbal or any sign at this point, but I understand the need and the desire, so I would do the same. I would, once you have these as the instructor, right, they have prompted, I have this, is you're going to show those, and then you're going to do what any deaf educator would do.
You're going to pair it afterwards.
Make sense? So I really do think that you can pair all of that together. Even if you're not sure they're ever going to be a signer, I want them to get this signal,
And
this
this.
signal, and this signal.
But
I
one-
want true total communication. with
But
this.
you never require the student to
don't
do
require
the
them
sign.
to sign it.
This is their word. Yes.
Steve.
Use a picture of the sign so it doesn't go away.
That's what I would probably do, is I would actually put that, and if you use Boardmaker, are you all familiar with Boardmaker?
Boardmaker has the sign.
Boardmaker
picture.
has the sign. So for some students, I only start with the
With the sign.
picture on there, and I don't have the word, but that's what else I would do. But honestly, that icon of the sign may also be very abstract, and they may not be able
And
to
it's
get that.
It's the problem we all have with pictures of sign. It's the 2D of the 3D and
But-
all of that. But it's another good option if you feel like that student is going to be able to move into
But what
a
else
sign
do you
modality.
do is you say, pop, I want pop. And that first thing, that your reinforcement is pop. Yeah, I want pop. And so you pair your sign when you're doing your reinforcement also. Instead of just pairing it with the word. You pair it when you're big, you're excited, they got it. And so that's also where you can pair your sign if you want to reinforce the sign. But truly, in its most basic level, we're not worried about other forms of communication at this point. The icon, the picture, is their reinforcement. For straight ASD kiddos, one of the concerns that has been brought about is they feel that this inhibits verbal communication. And that's one of the main concerns about switching to a PEC system that some parents may have, is this going to stop verbal language from a student acquiring it? And it doesn't. It actually is a bridge to spoken language, which if you're going to use that sign, I would say afterwards as reinforcement, they're going to
bridge to-
continually get it. It's going to be that bridge. If that language center is intact, and this is just reinforcing it, this is making that connection for them. So does that make sense? So that is, go ahead.
But you said the picture doesn't have to be what this is
Not in phase one.
right now, because we're just learning that.
Now we're just learning that I have to hand you this to get that thing that I want. I have to hand you something.
It could be. When I do it, I try to stick to categories so that it's related. And another thing that you will need to take into consideration is all of the other needs of your student. Is a 2x2 icon big enough? Maybe you need to start with a 4x4 icon. Is it an icon or is it a digital picture? So there's lots of different things based on your learner that are going to impact what this looks like.
And also based on level of abstraction, I kind of talked about that a little bit when I talked about structured work systems, but a student's level of abstraction, you really have to understand that. And that just means, does this mean anything to them? This is probably the highest level icon that you can get to, a black and white 2D drawing.
The next one would be a hand drawing, and then you're at words.
But you could do objects, you could do photos, color photos, and then you move to black and white photos, then you move to color icons, then you move to black and white icons. So there's a whole level of your own, their level of abstraction and ability to understand an abstract concept. So phase one is relatively short for a lot of kids.
Because all they have to do is they have to learn to pick up the icon and exchange it. So there's some helpful hints for phase one.
It is fully assisted, and the reason that you bring in that prompter is there's no verbal, and she's going to lead to that most, well, we consider that the most to least prompting, right? We'll get there and confuse you later.
So
Phase-
typically you're going to have a full, that
here they
prompter's hands are going to be over the student, anticipating they're going to go for the item. But they're going to have to be a step ahead to redirect that full physical to pick this up. So it typically is a hand over hand exchange the first couple of times. And then you start slowly fading your assistance, and maybe it's just your hands out there kind of guiding as a space guider to get them. And that's what the prompter does. The prompter never says a word. Even after that exchange, the communication partner is the one who's saying, yay, pop. That's the person who's providing the reinforcement. The prompter never says anything. So, yeah.
This is a really basic, and I'm sure all of you have done this, but if you're ever going to use picture exchange, you better standardize your Velcro.
Hard on hard,
You all have
soft
done,
on soft.
you've probably done
Otherwise,
Velcro
you'll wear
in your
your
classrooms,
icons.
but you will have the worst headache of your life if you don't just start out with your Velcro standardized. Do you know what I mean when I say that? Okay.
The hook and the loop. So the hook part, the hard part of the Velcro, you want on the hard surface. So
Hard
if
on
you-
hard. The scratchy part on the book, on the sentence strip.
If you do the opposite and you have the hard on the back of here, in winter when we're wearing sweaters or scarves, you're going to end up wearing all of your icons. They will stick to you and not the surface. Yeah.
And
Yep.
they'll chew them. Absolutely.
Which is
they'll
a
chew
great
'em.
sensory strategy to put Velcro underneath desks
And
to
just
pick at.
make it a rule in your classroom. Just tell all your paras, hard on hard, soft on soft. And this is always the scratchy part. And then there's no confusion. What part
And
goes
your
on where.
icons are interchangeable throughout the
To any
school
system.
throughout the classroom.
That's a really, seems like a small thing, but believe me,
So then
it's not.
you want to make sure that if you have something out that the student sees, say I have a bag of Cheetos and that's a highly motivating reinforcer, you want to make sure that you have that reinforcer available. Down the line you can teach that it's not available, but when you're first starting out this system, you want to always make sure that those reinforcers are available. So, moving on to phase 2, expanding spontaneity or persistence. And so this is when we introduce the communication book. And we don't necessarily have to have any pages inside. This is when we put the icon on the front of the book, just like so. And we put the book in front of the student. And so then the student is directed to pick the icon up from the book to do that exchange with the communication partner.
Now we're doing a grab and
Release. And so this is also when the communication partner is still standing there with their hand open to accept that icon. But this, during phase 2, is when you want to fade that open hand so that the student actually has to put it in my hand. They have to actively seek it out. And then,
My favorite part of phase 2
what's your favorite
is
part of
distance training.
So, distance training. I walk across the room and I have the reinforcer and I'm over here playing with it. And Christi has to take the icon off the book and bring it over to me and give it to me. And so you start off facing the student, then you kind of change your attention so that they actually have to come up to you. And if I'm standing with my back, she has to gain my attention to give me this icon. She has to seek me out to make that exchange. She has to seek me out to initiate because this is her word.
This is probably the number one thing, I'm tripping over a suitcase, that I see teachers do wrong. They don't know about this phase, A, or they just never thought about it, B, because where do we sit conveniently in our little kidney, right? Well, kidney is not real life by any means. And so I really love distance training because that's real life and that's generalizable to any communication partner that they are to walk up to. It is, in my mind, one of the most important steps in training functional communication. So I love, 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 love phase 2 because not only does it teach, grabbing something, that intentionality is really getting there, but it really gets at how you can gain attention appropriately to get needs met. So it really is going to be a foundational communication skill.
A couple of extra hints for phase 2 is I am the communication partner. It is my job, not the student's job, to put the icon back on that communication book. We never give the student their word back to go put it on the book. It's always the communication partner's job to put the words back on or the icons back on the book. Another thing is it's nice to have a home. So it's nice to find a location in the classroom, whether it be on the student's chair, the back of their chair, if there's a rope attached to this, or maybe on a counter where their communication book is going to stay. And it's also important to find what those locations are going to be in all of the other environments in which the student's going to be. Because remember, this is the student's words. This is how they're going to communicate. And so we need to make sure that it's used in every environment throughout the school environment and at home. I have a lot of kiddos who will go home and the first place it goes when they get home is in the closet. And so it's not necessarily an effective tool when it's being put in a closet.
And you all are familiar with that. That's no different than kids signing up school
Absolutely.
and going home and not having communication partners. So it's the same basic concept and same basic issue regardless. Yes, ma'am.
I was kind of thinking about that. Are you normally just, you're not expecting to use it?
No. Well,
I gotta move it. I'm gonna.
Essentially, yes. I mean, it's a team approach, and you'd love to have parents as a part of that team. Maybe you come in and you invite parents in, and they sit alongside you as you're beginning a PECS training or a PECS program, so that they can see what's going on and how to implement it. Typically, we say 30 trials when you're starting off. When you're in phase 1, you want to do 30 trials a day. So we break it down into 10 different trials 3 times a day, which is really easy because that's 10 M&Ms, and typically if it's a really reinforcing item, you'll have it done in 5 minutes. So it doesn't take much time. And you can fade the use of that prompter once you hit phase 2 and phase 3. Sometimes you have to reintroduce them for a little bit during phase 3 and phase 4, but we're not going to go there today. But it's nice to have that prompter available.
The other plus of going back to phase 1, if you want to make sure that this training is done accurately and systematically, is that then you as the teacher have the understanding of all the phases. Because let's talk about the kid who got the cold, who was off behavior-wise for a week. Chances are that they may have been a consistent phase 2, but that week they're off and they're going to slip back down into phase 1.
And so we can also email some really simple data sheets that if they did the exchange, she handed it to me and I got it, you just put a plus. And if she didn't, so you can do that with your 10 trials plus or minus, and that way you're collecting your data and you know how effective the student is. And that also tells you when to move on to the next phase.
We were hoping we'd have enough time to practice, but I don't know that we do. But I want to make sure that whoever has a book on your table gets a chance to look at that. Has everybody seen a PECS book? Okay. And you know that those colors,
most of them are not actual. This is a real PECS. There's a couple of real PECS books, but the other ones are just binders with Velcro and tape, and we take folders, cut folders or cardstock, 3-hole punch them, and that's how we make all of our pages inside.
and just a note, the color system, some people use consistent color systems on these, some people don't. If you are using, and some of you might be, still using the Fitzgerald key to teach syntax to your kids, God, that's ringing, whoa, wow, Fitzgerald key, whoa, where'd you pull that one out of? But you guys remember the Fitzgerald key. There's a newer version, right? Grammar Graphics. So if you're using something like that and you want to group your icons by color, if you're already using a syntax structure that's color-coded, then this very much builds right on that kind of a system. So be sure that you get the chance to look at that, and we've got a table full of visuals up here when we're done as well, but I want to be sure that we can get through all of these interventions before 2:30. I don't mean to rush, but if you have questions, just yell out at us. You can probably tell we're laid back.
Phase 3.
Phase 3.
Is where you introduce another picture. And you're going to do correspondence checks, because what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that the student is actually discriminating and that they're actually, the icon that they're exchanging with you is really what they want. So what you want to do here is you want to find something that the student doesn't like a wooden spoon or a sock, if those are things, because I know some of our kiddos, they really do enjoy wooden spoons and socks. So you find something that they don't like, could be just a blank icon. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you're going to have both items, and you're going to make sure that they actually are seeking out, discriminating between the two photos that are on that communication book, choosing the right item, and handing it to you. If they choose the wrong one, say they choose Play-Doh, you know they don't like Play-Doh, you're going to give it to them, they're probably going to throw it on the ground. And then you're going to reset the book and try it over, because you want to make sure that they're actually looking at the pictures and then discriminating. And once you've hit discrimination, it flies. They get it. They get the point of it. They get that there's certain messages, that this is a certain word, and if I pick this up and I give it to somebody, that's that exchange. And you will build your vocabulary systems quickly. And it's really cool to see a student walk over to their communication book that has 30 pages of pictures, to just flip through it, know exactly what they want, exactly what they're looking for, tear off that icon, put it on their strip, and then exchange it with the communication partner.
At the beginning of phase 3, you're going to have a lot of things thrown at you. And I always think that's a really good thing. We always use prunes, those little individually wrapped prunes. We use prunes in the clinic all the time.
I like
People
prunes.
were like, why are you buying prunes? Prunes, because I didn't have any students who liked prunes. But so it was a prune or your red gummy or whatever they wanted. And they'd hand you that prune card and you'd be like, okay, prune. Yeah.
Have at it.
And so, but there's nothing better than finding something that you know they don't like. So your white food eater, give them something cheesy Dorito. They hate that, right? They only like that white food, crackers kind of thing. Find something that you know that they don't want, so that then they can learn this from this, and they can start to pay attention to those. This is also the point at which we generally start to reduce picture size if your kids have the fine motor ability to do so. The first time I did official PECS training, I worked with a child that was very, very complex and hemiplegic who could not cross midline well. And so we stayed on a very large choice board for a very long time until she could really get her fine motor skills built up enough to move to a smaller size. At this point is where oftentimes they will move kids onto a Dynavox or some other sort of system.
What you're going to find is we have some kids who have, we're going to talk about technology in a minute, but we'll just hop there right now.
Why not?
We have some kids, this is considered a low-tech OGCOM system. You're going to have students that have a preference for lower tech. You're also going to have a preference for students who are higher tech. And so there are now iPads that have very similar systems to PECS that you can use on the iPad. Are you all familiar with what a GoTalk is? Well, now there's GoTalk apps on the iPad. There's Perliquo, there's Augie. And you're going to see that some students have an inkling for technology, and so that technology is going to be even more motivation to help them use their words. And so it's really important to go back to your speech pathologist and find out, have them do a speech assessment to find out what type of system is going to be the most effective for your students.
One of the things about phase 3 on the next slide that we often find helpful is, even after you feel like they're doing pretty good with discrimination, is don't forget to add items back onto your board that you know are non-preferred. And continue to do discrimination checks. I've made that mistake in the clinic several times where I was pretty sure they were in solid discrimination, and then lo and behold, an icon got out there that I knew he hated and he handed it to me.
Kept choosing it.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And maybe that's because his vocabulary was expanding and those pictures were more similar than different. And that could definitely be a part of it. But that's something to not forget to do, and to not say no.
Even though you know they don't want it. They chose that icon, so you just put it back on the book and have another trial. But
you assume that they love prunes. You don't go, no, prunes. You go, oh, prunes!
yummy!
Duck. The quick duck.
This
It's
is also
important.
where it's really good to hit Menards and get an organizer where you put like screws and things in, and you can organize your icons, make 20 of them, and you can have them, because I tell you, you'll lose them really, really fast.
Yep.
Or you have the kiddos that really enjoy flapping them and pulling
Chewing
the lamination off of them. So have extra copies. and put in a container to organize.
Questions on PACs? Yes, ma'am.